Okay, so number one, let's suppose we had this. We had 4x squared equal 3x minus 3. 4x squared equal 3x minus 3. Okay, so if you're going to solve this equation using the quadratic formula, what must you do first? Put it in standard form. Right, so you got to bring all the terms to one side because you have to have 0 on the other side. Same thing with factoring, right? You would need to put it in standard form. Hold on. Okay, so the other thing you have to remember about solving these quadratic equations, when you put it in standard form, it's always easiest to have the coefficient of x squared being positive. So I noticed that some of you in that worksheet that you just turned in today, or you picked up today, you were bringing the variables to the other side, you made them negative. It's a little bit more difficult to do with factoring. So it's always a good idea to bring the terms to one side and have the coefficient of x squared being what kind of number? Positive. All right, so whenever you bring terms to the other side, remember the sign changes because you're using the addition property for equality. So for example, and you don't have to do this step, but basically you agree you'll be subtracting 3x on both sides? And so 3x minus 3x is 0. That's basically what you would be doing. And so you get 4x squared minus 3x equal negative 3. So that's a process. That's why the sign changes. But we don't do all that because you have enough experience to know that when you bring terms to the other side of the equation, the sign changes. So basically all you had to do was just go ahead and rewrite this as 4x squared and tell me what else. Minus 3x plus 3. Okay, that's all you had to do. Because the other part you've done in at least one other course using the addition property of equality. Okay, now, before you substitute things into the quadratic formula, it's a good idea to determine what A, B, and C are. So what's A? 4. What's B? Negative 3. Okay, so one thing that students have issues with sometimes is the sign. You got to make sure that that's not a positive 3x, that's a negative 3x. So the coefficient of x is negative 3. And what's C? 3. So C is 3. Okay, now, all you do is just take those values and plug them into the formula. So we get x equal. Now remember, read it as this. Read it as the opposite of b. So if b is a negative 3, the opposite of a negative 3 is a positive 3, plus or minus the square root of. Now it's a good idea for what you write inside here, and that's called the discriminant. We'll talk more about that at another time. But the discriminant, put those in parentheses. So what's b in this case? Negative 3. What am I doing to that negative 3? Squaring it. Minus 4 times a. What's a? Okay, and what's c? 3. All divided by 2 times a, and what's a? 4. So when you do that worksheet that you're going to get dealing with this, make sure you show this step. I need to see this. So make a note of yourself that that's something I want to see. Okay? All right, and then, so let's go ahead and simplify the radicand. Remember, the radicand is the part that's under the square root, and for the quadratic formula, it's called the discriminant. So I'm going to call it the discriminant, although we hadn't done anything with it or discussed what it means. So I get 3 plus or minus the square root of. Now remember, b squared, if b is not 0, then when you square b, it better be what kind of number? Positive. So never say that this is a negative 9. It's always supposed to be what? Positive. Or 0. Can never be negative because you're squaring b. b means b times b. So b is negative. A negative times a negative is a positive. Okay, now what's a negative 4 times 3? Use your calculator. I'm listening to what you're telling me. I'm not actually doing it. All divided by 8. All right, now 9 minus 48. Okay, negative 39, all divided by 8. All right, so that's where we're at. So last class period, we kind of reviewed the idea of imaginary numbers. And so let's kind of talk about that for a moment before we come back over here. So in terms of a review, We know that by definition, the square root of a negative 1 is defined to be what imaginary number? I. Okay? And so if you have something like, now listen carefully because that's going to be important for part 2 that you're going to turn in next class period that you received last class period. If you have the square root of, let's say, a negative 49, what's that? Okay. So and what you did last semester was you kind of did this in steps, although you really don't need to do that anymore. But basically what you said, all right, well, that's going to be the square root of a negative 1 to the square root of 49, right? And what's the square root of a negative 1? Okay, that's the definition of imaginary number. And the square root of 49 is 7. But we prefer, and you've got to remember this, we prefer to rewrite it as 7i. Okay, so remember, this is called the imaginary number. Okay, now if we had the square root of, let's say, no, I'm not going to do 24. I think 24 is one of the worksheets. So let's say the square root of 40. No, that's okay. Let me see. 9 times. Let's do 27. Square root of 27. Okay, now you see when we got that 7 right here, we got the 7 because 49 was what kind of number?
Perfect square.
Perfect square. And the square root of a perfect square will give you a whole number. So square root of 49 is 7. But 27 is not a perfect square, right?
Right.
But you can still simplify this. And so you got to remember how to simplify square roots. They can't always be simplified, but this one can, because you're going to ask yourself, since I'm dealing with square root, what perfect square goes into 27? I always use the largest. 9. So I can rewrite this as the square root of 9 times 3. And the square root of 9 times 3 I can write as the square root of 9 times the square root of 3. And the square root of 9 is 9's perfect square. So the square root of 9 is 3. So I get 3 square root of 3. Okay? Now if I had, let's say, the square root of negative 8. Negative 8. So I'm taking the square root of a negative number, so you know at some point you're going to have what symbol? That I. Right, so you got that I there. So I'm going to rewrite this first of all as the square root of a negative 1 times the square root of 8. And the square root of a negative 1 we know is I. Now let's talk about the square root of 8. Let's talk about 8. Is there a perfect square other than 1 that goes into 8? 4. So I can write this as 4 times 2. And so you remember last semester what you did at that point was you said, well, that's going to be I times the square root of 4 times the square root of 2, right? And we know that which one of these can I go further with?
4.
The square root of 4, which we know is 2. So I get I times 2 times the square root of 2. But we know there's a certain way that we want to write this. So what's the best way to write this? 2I square root of 2. Now, if you recall, you may or may not have been one of these individuals, but for some reason, there are some of you that want to do this. Well, that's incorrect. What's wrong about writing it like that? The i's under the square root. You can't have the I under the square root. We already took care of that. When I wrote this, is that I under the square root? No, it's not under the square root. So basically what you're saying is that when you do it like that, you're saying this. You're saying that this right here is 2 times square root of a negative 1, right? Because isn't that what I is? Mm-hmm. Well, that looks totally different than what this is. Okay? So you got to make sure that if you're going to put that I on the end, that you can basically tell me that it's at the end. Because if you turn it in and it's under the square root, it's not correct. So that's why it's always a good idea. It's always a good idea to, when you have a square root in your answer, to put the I in front. So this is not correct. If you're going to put it in the end, you better say this instead. 2 square root of 2I, like that. You see the difference?
Yeah.
Okay. But to be on the safe side, put it in front. All right, so now you should have enough information to be able to do that, complete that worksheet, part 2. So let's go back to this now. Okay, so remember last class period we went further if we could. We talked about rational numbers, we also talked about irrational numbers, and we saw what to do in each case. But here, my solution is not a real number. What kind of solution am I going to get? Imaginary. Because the square root of a negative 39, you're going to get that I. So let's talk about the square root of a negative 39. What I would do at that point, and you don't have to, but what I would do at that point is I go off to the side and kind of look at the square root of a negative 39. And then think about what we just talked about. Well, the square root of a negative 39, I can write as I times what?
39.
Not 39, but you got to say what? Square root of 39. Now ask yourself, can I simplify the square root of 39? Is there a perfect square other than 1 that is a factor of 39? No. So you can't simplify this. And so what you're going to do then is all you're going to do is just say this. This is going to be 3 plus I square root of 39, all divided by 8. That's all you can do. So in my math lab, though, when you do my math lab, they're going to ask you to write this as 2 separate solutions. So, yes.
Or is this supposed to be negative 39 or just 39?
Where? Well, remember, okay, so what you may want to do is write it out like this then. Say the square root of a negative 1 times the square root of 39. And what's the square root of a negative 1? I. Yeah, so you may want to do that. You may want to do that extra step. But there are some individuals that can look at square root of negative 39 in their mind just know that that's I square root of 39. The square root of a negative 1 is what? I. Okay, so since I can't do anything else with this, then on your worksheet, this will be fine. That will be what you would write. On my math lab, you can write it out as 2 separate solutions. They're going to want you to write as 2 separate solutions, as I say, separated by commas. So when you go to my math lab, there's a fraction bar. You click on that fraction bar in your palette. You click on the fraction bar, and then this will show up, and you just put the numerator, and you put the denominator. So you're going to say 3 plus I square root of 39, and then at the bottom you'll have, in the denominator you'll have 8, and the other one will be 3 minus I square root of 39 divided by 8. Okay? All right, so that was number 1. Okay, let's look at number 2. So number 2, you have two x squared equal 1 plus 4x. So 2x squared equals 1 plus 4x. All right, so tell me what this step would be.
Times to one side.
Okay, so you're putting in what form? Standard form. All right, so rather than doing all these steps you've learned in the past, the addition, property of equality, let's just do it in one step. So I'm going to have 2x squared and put in descending order. So 2x squared, if I put this in descending order, what will be the next term? Minus 4x, and then what? Minus 1 equal 0. Okay. All right. Now before we plug the values of a, b, and c into the quadratic formula, let's actually indicate what they are. So what's a? 2. What's b? And what's c? Okay, good. So b is not positive 4, b is a negative 4, and b is not a c. Your constant is not a positive 1, it's a negative 1. So it's very important you keep those signs correct. And then all you do now is just plug into the formula. So we get x equal the opposite of b. So if b is a negative 4, what's the opposite of b? Okay, plus or minus the square root of, in parentheses, I'm going to put what number? Negative 4, so b squared, and that's squared, minus 4 times a, what's a? 2 times c, and what's c? Negative 1, all divided by 2 times a, and what's a? 2. All right, so that part I need to see, so remind yourself, you need to show that on that worksheet. Then let's go and simplify the discriminant. So what's negative 4 squared? 16. All right, so if you use your calculator and you get negative 16, that's because you're not putting negative 4 in parentheses. So it's got to be in parentheses when using your calculator. So you get 4 plus or minus the square root of 16. Now what's a negative 4 times a positive 2 times a negative 1?
Positive 8.
Positive 8. All divided by 4. So that's going to equal 4 plus or minus the square root of 24. All right, I'm trying to adjust the light for the video here. All right, 24, right? All divided by 4. So that's where we're at. So this is going to take us to reviewing some things about simplifying radicals. Now, are my solutions real or imaginary?
Real.
They're real because you don't see the square of a negative number. So they're real. If they're real, either they're going to be rational or irrational. Now, just out of curiosity, can you tell me which one it is?
Irrational.
It's irrational. How do you know it's irrational?
Because not a whole number. Not a perfect square.
Okay, good. Because 24 is not a perfect square. So since 24 is not a perfect square, you're going to end up with a square root in your answer. Okay? All right, so that's what. So good job with that. Okay, so let's go off to the side and figure out what the square root of 24 is. So we know that 24 is not a perfect square, but ask yourself, just like we do with the square of 39, is there a perfect square other than 1, and always use the largest, that's a factor of 24? 4. 4 times what?
6.
4 times what?
6.
6, right? Okay. So I'm going to write this as the square root of 4 times 6. Always use a perfect square. Don't say 12 times 2. Because you remember last semester your teacher said, well, 12, you can't use 12 times 2. I mean, you could, but then you would have a lot more work to do. Always use a perfect square. Because 12 is not a perfect square, and 2 is not a perfect square. If you use a perfect square, it makes things a whole lot easier for yourself. So once you get 4 times 6, then you can split it apart. So that'll be the square root of 4 times the square root of 6. So some of you may need to do that. You may need to go up to the side and write all this stuff down. It's no big deal. Some of you can just visually look at this right away and say what the square root of 24 is simplified. So what's the square root of 4?
2.
2. So you get 2 square root of 6. So that goes here. So I get 4 plus or minus 2 square root of 6, all divided by 4. Okay? All right, now, let's talk about simplifying this further. Listen carefully. So when we did number 1, we couldn't do anything else in terms of simplifying. So if you go back to number 1, you will notice that right here, if we go back to this one, this is a 3. This number in front of the I is a 1, and this is an 8. What do 3, 1, and 8 have in common? What factor goes into 3, 8, and 1? 1. Okay, so since that's 1, I'm going to leave it alone. Now look at number 2. If I look at, I'm going to circle this. Let me go ahead and do it here. I'm going to rewrite it. I'm going to circle these, the 4, the 2, and the 4. What factor does 4, 2, and 4 have in common? 2. So I can reduce those. So you're going to say 4 divided by 2 is 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. 4 divided by 2 is 2. So this becomes 2 plus or minus square root of 6 divided by 2. That's what you get. Okay? Now remember, we had the discussion again last class period that what some students did last semester was they did this, and you got to be careful. And you got to remember what we said last class period. So what they did, what some students did was this: 4 into 4 is 1, 4 into 4 is 1, and they said the answer is 1 plus or minus 2 squared is 6. Is that correct? No, it's not correct because this denominator is not only being divided into this part of the numerator, but it's also being divided into that part. Okay, so you can't do that. So when you do the worksheet, and by the way, when you do the worksheets, you get errors on it. It's no big deal. It's supposed to help you for a test. So you know what your errors are, so you can correct those for the test. The test can be the important thing for you. So use the worksheets to see where your issues are, and you work on those. All right, so that'll be the answer for number 2, right here. Now, on my math lab, they're going to say since this is an irrational number, you can just split it apart. You're going to say 2 plus the square root of 6 divided by 2, comma, and what's the other? 2 minus square root of 6 divided by 2. Okay? So that was number 2. Let's look at number 3. So number 3, let's suppose we had this. Number 3. We have 4x squared plus 8x minus 1 equals 0. So it's already in standard form. So what's A, B, and C? What's A? 4. What's B? 8. And what's C? -1. So A is 4, B is 8, and C is -1. And it's in descending order. All right, so we just plug into the formula, substitute those values into the formula. So x equal the opposite of b. So b is 8. What's the opposite of 8? -8 plus or minus the square root of 8 squared, right? Minus 4 times a. What's a? Times c. -1. All divided by 2 times a. What's a? 4. All right, so remember, that's something you have to show me. So that's going to equal -8 plus or minus the square root of, what's 8 squared? 64. What's a -4 times 4 times a -1? Positive 16 plus 16 though, right? Okay. All divided by 8. So I get -8 plus or minus the square root of 64 plus 16, 80, okay? All divided by 8. That's where we're at. Now, again, don't make the mistake and reduce those 8s right now. So what I'm saying is this. Don't say 8 into 8 is 1, 8 into -8 is -1. Because you know you can't do that because you're forgetting about the square root of 80 as well. Okay? And also remember, can this 8 reduce into this 80? No, because that's not 80, that's what? Square root of 80. So if you put the square root of 80 in your calculator, you're not going to get 80. You're going to get a decimal that doesn't terminate, doesn't repeat at all. Because my solutions are going to be what kind of solutions? Rational or irrational? Irrational. Because 80 is not a perfect square. So let's talk about the square root of 80 then. And always use the largest. You don't have to use the largest, but it does help you to come up with this quickly. So remember your perfect squares. Remember your perfect squares. Yeah, so 1, 4, 9, 16, 25, 36, and so on, right? So 16. So just use your calculator to figure these things out. 16. 80 is 16 times what? 5? Okay. And hopefully at this point, and if you're not at this point able to tell me what that is right away, what's the square root of 16 times 5? 4 square root of 5. And then you just write them out if you got to. So 4 square root of 5. And so that's what this is. So I'm going to go back up here. I'm going to rewrite this. Negative 8 plus or minus 4 square root of 5, all divided by 8. All right, now at this point, this is where you ask yourself, do I need to stop or do I need to go further? What do you think? Go further, because think about what we talked about with number 2 and number 1. I'm going to go ahead and rewrite this right here so I can circle some things. So if we look at negative 8, 4, and 8, what's the largest factor that they have in common? 4. So the GCF of those three numbers is 4. So 4 into 8 is 2. 4 to negative 8 is a negative 2. 4 to 4 is 1. So therefore my answer then will be what? Negative 2 plus or minus square root of 5, all divided by 2. Now again, don't make the mistake and reduce these 2's right here. You know you can't do that. In other words, what I'm saying is you can't say this. Because what else did you forget to do? You forgot the fact that 2 is also being divided into the square root of 15. So don't make that mistake. Stop there, you're done. Leave it as such. Okay, number 4. So let's suppose in number 4 I had this. Three x squared minus 8x equal negative 9. 3x squared minus 8x equal negative 9. All right. So next Saturday at the end of the class period when you take that quiz, what are you going to do first? Put it in standard form. So what are you going to write? Okay, good. So 3x squared minus 8x plus 9 equals 0. All right, first thing you would do. Then, at this point, before you put anything into the quadratic formula, determine what A, B, and C are. Now, that's going to be important, so make sure your A, B, and C's are correct. So what's the value of A? What's the value of B? Negative 8. And what's the value of C? 9. So you're on your way to getting, if this is 10 points, you're on your way of getting 10 out of 10. So x equal, good. So the opposite of b, remember, so b is negative 8. So the opposite of negative 8 is 8. Plus or minus the square root of, in parentheses, what do I put? And what do I do with that? Square it. Minus 4 times a, what's a in parentheses? 3. And what's c in parentheses? 9. All divided by 2 times a, and what's a? 3. All right, so I get 8 plus or minus. This is where we, at this point, this is where you would simplify the discriminant. What's negative 8 squared? 64, because a negative 8 times a negative 8 is a positive 64. Now use your calculator if you need to. A negative 4 times 3 times 9.
Negative 108.
What is it? Negative 108, okay. All divided by 6. All right, what's 64 minus 108? Negative 44, okay. All right, is this where you would stop? No, you know you need to go further with this. Because is this going to be a real solution? And sometimes they call solutions roots, and sometimes you may hear the word roots, R-O-O-T. So am I going to get real solutions or imaginary solutions? Imaginary. Because I have the square root of a negative number. So the discriminant is negative, right? So let's go off to the side and kind of work on that. So I know I can write this as the square root of a negative 1 times the square root of 44. And so that's where the square root of negative 1 is I. But can I simplify the square root of 44?
Yeah.
Someone said no.
4 and 11.
4.
It's gonna be 4 times 11.
Yeah, perfect square root of 44 is 4. So remember a while ago, I wrote down your perfect squares. Well, they're an infinite number. I wrote down a few of them. What you, let me find out where they are. So what you may want to do is right before a quiz, just quickly write down the first 7. And then at that point, you would ask yourself, besides the number 1, because 1 is a factor of every number, then ask yourself, well, 4 is a factor of 44. Well, if you're not sure, all you do is take your calculator, say 44 divided by what? 4. And you get what? 11. So it is. Okay? So 4 times 11. So this is going to be I times the square root of 4 times 11. So it'll be I, and I'm just going to write in this step, but many of you can see this right away and say that's going to be 2I square root of 11. Because that's the square root of 4 times square root of 11, right? And what's the square root of 4? 2. So you get 2I square root of 11. So that goes here. So I get 8 plus or minus 2I square root of 11 divided by 6. So that's where you're at. So if you stop there, you would get, I give you 9 out of 10. I mean, that's good. But why would you get that extra point?
You can reduce.
Because you can reduce. Because you know that 8, 2, and 6, what's the GCF of 8, 2, and 6? 2. So if I rewrite that part, and I circle the 8, 2, and the 6, what I've circled, all those 3 numbers have a GCF of 2. So 6 divided by 2 is 3. 8 divided by 2 is 4. 2 divided by 2 is 1. And then you would just give me 4 plus or minus square root of 11 over 3 divided by 3. Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Yep. So if you got the I, you would lose a point. Yes.
And we can't write that as 4 plus or minus the square root of 11.
Yeah, you can put, yes, just as long as, in our discussion, just as long as that I is obviously on the outside. Okay, like there's at least one of you in here that when you turn something in, you had I on the inside. Okay, so remember last semester I posted those things. Social media. All right. No, I didn't do that. Did not do that. All right. So any questions on that part? All right. Now, I'm going to give you the worksheet dealing with this part.